My daughter tugged my sleeve so hard it hurt and whispered words that shattered my world. "Mom, Daddy brought another woman to my school today." I laughed at first because trust makes you stupid. But when she described the woman's shoes, her voice, the way Daddy wouldn't let go of her hand, something inside me went cold. That night, my husband kissed me like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, our daughter stopped sleeping. She started flinching at the sound of school bells, and I realized the woman at the school wasn't just someone else. She was placed there on purpose, and the reason why would destroy the man I thought I married.
The school pickup line was chaos, like always. Engines idling, parents half listening, half scrolling, kids bursting out of doors like shaken soda cans. I was thinking about dinner, whether I had enough chicken to stretch into tomorrow, when I saw my daughter scan the crowd and lock eyes with me. She didn't run like she usually did. She walked, slow, careful. Her backpack hung too low on one shoulder, and her fingers kept twisting the zipper like she was afraid it might come undone. When she reached me, she didn't smile. She pressed her face into my side harder than usual and stayed there. "Long day?" I asked, brushing her hair back. She nodded but didn't look up. We started toward the car when I felt her tug my sleeve. Not the impatient tug she used when she wanted snacks, but a sharp, urgent pull, like she needed me closer. She leaned in until her mouth was right by my ear. "Mom," she whispered, her voice so quiet I almost missed it. "Daddy took another woman to my school today." I stopped walking. Not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to notice, just enough for my body to feel like it had slammed into something invisible. "What?" I laughed softly, because that's what you do when something makes no sense. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She glanced around the parking lot first, the way kids do when they think they're about to say something wrong. Then she leaned in again. "She wasn't a mom," she said. "She held Daddy's hand." The laugh died in my throat. "That doesn't sound right," I said quickly, too quickly. "Daddy wouldn't—" "She wore pointy shoes," my daughter interrupted. "Brown ones, and they clicked when she walked. She smelled like oranges." I opened the car door and helped her inside, my hands suddenly clumsy. Kids say strange things. Kids imagine, kids misunderstand. I told myself that over and over as I buckled her seatbelt. "Maybe you saw Daddy helping someone," I said. "Teachers have helpers sometimes." She shook her head hard. "No, she wasn't a teacher. She came with him." I closed the door and stood there for a second longer than necessary, the sounds of the parking lot muffled like I was underwater. When I slid into the driver's seat, I forced my voice to stay light. "Why do you think that?" I asked. "Because," she said, lowering her voice even more, "he told me not to tell you." That did it. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. My heart started beating fast, sharp, like it was trying to warn me of something my mind refused to hear. "What exactly did he say?" She stared at her knees. "He said grown-ups have secrets, and that it wasn't my secret to share." I swallowed. "Did he say why she was there?" "She's going to be at my school for a while." She smiled at me like she already knew me. I turned onto the road, the school shrinking in the rearview mirror, and tried to breathe. My husband was many things, private, controlled, sometimes distant, but he wasn't reckless, he wasn't cruel, and he certainly wasn't the kind of man who brought women into our daughter's world. This had to be a misunderstanding. "What did she do?" I asked. "She watched me, not like teachers watch, like when Daddy checks the locks at night." I felt a chill creep up my arms. "She talked to me too," she added. My grip slipped on the wheel. "About what?" "She asked me if I liked school and if I felt safe here." I pulled over. Cars honked behind me, but I didn't care. I turned to face her fully now. "Did anything happen?" I asked, my voice tight. "No, she was nice." "Too nice." "Then why are you whispering?" I asked. She hesitated. Then she said the words that made my stomach drop. "Because Daddy looked scared when he saw her." I stared at my daughter, really stared at her, seeing how small she suddenly looked in that seat, how serious, how weighed down. I told myself again that there was an explanation. There was always an explanation. That marriages didn't just crack open in school parking lots. That children didn't become messengers of disaster. But something had shifted. I could feel it, like a hairline fracture running through something solid. When we got home, she followed me inside without asking for snacks. She sat at the table while I moved around the kitchen, pretending to be normal, pretending my hands weren't shaking. "Mom?" she said softly. "Yes, baby?" She twisted her fingers together, eyes shiny with worry. "Am I in trouble for telling you?" That night, I told myself I was overreacting.
I said it silently while chopping onions. I said it while setting the table. I said it while listening for my husband's car in the driveway. Fear feeds on imagination, I reminded myself, and imagination feeds on love when love feels threatened. My husband had never given me a reason not to trust him. That was the truth I clung to. I met him when I was 26, fresh out of a relationship that had taught me what dishonesty looked like. He was different, measured, thoughtful, the kind of man who didn't overshare but didn't dodge questions either. On our third date, he told me about his past before I even asked, about mistakes, about choices he regretted. He said he believed secrets rotted people from the inside. I'd rather be alone than lie, he'd said. I believed him. When we married, he gave me passwords without hesitation. When our daughter was born, he cried harder than I did. When work kept him late, he sent photos, voice notes, proof, not because I demanded it, but because he said he wanted me to feel secure. So when my daughter whispered about another woman, my mind bent itself into shapes to protect the man I loved. Maybe it was a colleague, maybe a school administrator, maybe my daughter misunderstood affection for formality. Kids don't always get context. Still, context didn't explain secrets. He came home at 6:30, right on time, kissed my cheek, lifted our daughter into the air like he always did. His smile was familiar, warm, practiced. "How was school?" he asked her. She shrugged. He didn't notice anything wrong, or if he did, he hid it well. At dinner, she barely touched her food, pushed peas into neat little lines, refused dessert. That alone should have alarmed me. My daughter loved dessert more than bedtime stories. "Everything okay?" I asked gently. She nodded without looking up. My husband talked about work, about a meeting that ran long, about traffic, ordinary things, safe things. I watched him as he spoke, searching for cracks. His hands didn't shake. His voice didn't falter. He didn't look like a man hiding anything. But then he asked our daughter, "Did you have fun today?" She froze. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Her fork hovered in midair before clinking softly against her plate. "Yes," she said. He smiled. "Good." That should have been the end of it, but something in his tone lingered too long, like he was waiting for something else, waiting for her to say more, or worse, to say the wrong thing. Over the past few weeks, there had been small things I brushed aside because that's what trust teaches you to do. He'd started checking his phone face down. He'd taken calls in the garage. He insisted on handling school paperwork himself, something he'd never cared about before. When I asked why he volunteered to drop our daughter off that morning, he said, "I just wanted to." I smiled, thought it was sweet. Trust makes you blind not because you're stupid, but because you want to see goodness. You choose the version of reality that hurts the least. After dinner, our daughter disappeared into her room without asking to be excused. I noticed my husband watching her go. His eyes followed her down the hallway, not with annoyance or affection, but calculation. It was subtle. Anyone else would have missed it. "Did you help out at school today?" I asked casually, rinsing dishes. He paused for half a second too long. "No," he said. "Why?" "No reason," I replied. "She mentioned you stopped by." He shrugged. "Kids mix things up." There it was again, that dismissal. Too easy. Later, while I tucked her into bed, she wrapped her arms around my neck like she was afraid I might disappear. "Mom," she whispered, "Daddy didn't want me to look at her too much." My chest tightened. "Why not?" He said some stories aren't for kids. I kissed her forehead, told her everything was fine, told her she was safe. I waited until her breathing evened out before slipping from the room. In the hallway, I found my husband standing in the shadows, leaning against the wall near her door. He didn't realize I was watching him. His eyes were fixed on the door, not lovingly, not protectively, like he was guarding something that might escape. I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to my husband's breathing, steady and unbothered beside me, while my mind replayed my daughter's words over and over again. "She smelled like oranges. He told me not to tell you. Daddy looked scared." By morning, denial had thinned into resolve. I waited until my husband left for work. I waited until my daughter was on the bus. Then I grabbed my purse, rehearsed a lie in the mirror, and drove to the school. It felt wrong, sneaking into a place that had always felt safe, like I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. At the front desk, I smiled the smile I used when I didn't want questions. "I'm here to drop off my daughter's lunch," I said, lifting a paper bag I'd packed for no one. She forgot it. The receptionist nodded without much interest. "What's her name?" I gave it. My heart thudded while she typed. "She's in class already," the woman said. "You can leave it here." "Actually," I added quickly, "could I just see her for a second? She's been anxious lately." The receptionist hesitated, then gestured down the hall. "Her class is just changing activities, if you're quick." I walked past the bulletin boards, past the finger-painted posters and motivational quotes, my heels echoing too loudly against the tile. Every step felt like a countdown. I heard her before I saw her. A woman's voice, low, calm, confident, not the sing-song tone most teachers used with kids. This voice didn't try to win affection, it expected attention. I slowed. She stood near the doorway of my daughter's classroom, speaking with another teacher, tall, composed, dark hair pulled back neatly, not a strand out of place. Her posture was effortless, like she belonged wherever she stood. Then she shifted her weight, and I saw the shoes, pointed, brown, polished leather. They clicked softly against the floor when she turned, exactly as my daughter had described. My chest tightened. I told myself it was coincidence. Brown shoes weren't rare, but my instinct screamed louder than logic ever could. The woman laughed softly at something the other teacher said. It wasn't loud or forced. It was controlled, measured, like she knew exactly how much of herself to reveal. She glanced into the classroom, and for just a second, her eyes met mine. She didn't look surprised. That was what chilled me. Most people look startled when they realize they're being watched, curious maybe, uncomfortable, but she didn't flinch. She held my gaze, assessing, before offering a polite, almost sympathetic smile, like she knew who I was. I ducked into the hallway before she could approach. My heart pounded as I leaned against the wall, pressing my palm flat against my chest. I wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't my role. Wives didn't stalk classrooms. Mothers didn't investigate schools. But I couldn't unsee her. I forced myself to keep walking, past the classroom, past my daughter's coat hook, resisting the urge to look inside. I reached the office again just as the bell rang, releasing a wave of noise. The receptionist looked up. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said too quickly. "Who was that woman near the third-grade room?" "Oh, she's one of our temporary substitutes." Temporary. The word lodged itself deep in my chest. "For which class?" I asked. "She's floating right now, helping where needed." Helping? With what? With who? I nodded, thanked her, and left before I could say something I'd regret. Outside, the sun felt too bright. The parking lot buzzed with normalcy that felt obscene. I sat in my car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, replaying every detail. Her calm, her smile, her shoes. Most of all, the way she'd looked at me, as if she'd been expecting this moment. That evening, I asked my husband about substitutes. "Oh, schools are short-staffed everywhere," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Why?" "No reason," I replied, my voice steady. "Just curious." He nodded too easily. Later, while he helped our daughter with homework, I watched the two of them from the doorway. He leaned in close, his voice low. She nodded obediently, eyes down. And for the first time since I'd known him, I wondered not who that woman was, but why he'd brought her so close to our child. Once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. The next morning, I drove my daughter to school myself. My husband had already left, earlier than usual. He'd said there was an emergency meeting. I nodded, kissed his cheek, and waited until his car disappeared before my chest began to tighten. At the drop-off curb, my daughter hesitated before opening the door. "She's here today," she whispered. "Who, sweetheart?" "The lady with the clicking shoes." I watched her walk inside, small and stiff, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. I parked instead of leaving. This time I didn't bring an excuse bag. I walked straight to the office and asked to speak with the vice principal. I told myself I was just being a concerned parent, that this was normal. It didn't feel normal. The vice principal smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "We're very careful about staffing," she said. "All our substitutes are fully vetted." I'm sure, I replied. I was just curious why a substitute is spending so much time with my daughter's class. She folded her hands. We're providing additional support. For what exactly? General classroom needs, she said smoothly. I waited. She didn't elaborate. Was she requested? I asked. There it was, the flicker. A blink too long, a glance toward the door. She was assigned, the vice principal said. By whom? She smiled again. By administration. I leaned forward. Because my daughter says my husband brought her here. The air shifted. The vice principal cleared her throat. Sometimes parents are involved in placement discussions. My pulse spiked. Involving parents usually requires consent forms. Yes, of course. And those forms would include my signature. Another pause. The paperwork was submitted electronically, she said carefully. I stared at her. By my husband. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was measured. Yes. My ears rang. May I see it? I asked. Her smile thinned. I'll need to check with the district. Of course she would. I left the office with my hands shaking, my calm cracking with every step. In the hallway, I passed the substitute again. She was kneeling to speak to a child, her expression gentle, reassuring. Anyone watching would think she belonged there. She looked up and met my eyes once more. This time, she nodded. Not friendly, not threatening. Acknowledging. I drove home in a fog and pulled up the school portal on my laptop. Every permission slip, every form, every digital signature, my name was there, except on one document, the request form, signed by my husband alone. I stared at the timestamp. Yesterday morning. The same morning he'd said he was at work all day. My phone buzzed with a message from him. Running late, don't wait up. My hands went cold. He hadn't been at work. He'd been here. Children don't announce when something is wrong. They change. At first it was small. My daughter stopped singing in the mornings. She used to hum while brushing her teeth, off-key and carefree, making up songs about nothing at all. Now she moved through the house quietly, like sound itself might get her in trouble. That night, she woke up screaming. I found her tangled in her sheets, face damp with sweat, eyes wide and unfocused. She clutched my arm so tightly, her nails left little half-moons in my skin. She was there, she cried. She was watching me. I gathered her into my lap, rocking her back and forth. Who was watching you? She watching me? The lady, she whispered, the one Daddy brought. I felt my chest tighten. What was she doing? She didn't say anything, my daughter said, burying her face in my shoulder. She just looked at me like she was counting something. Counting. That word echoed in my head long after she fell asleep again. The next morning, I found the sheets in the laundry basket, heavier than they should have been. I stared at them longer than necessary before folding them away, my throat burning with questions I wasn't ready to ask. At breakfast, she barely touched her food. I don't feel good, she said when I suggested school. My instinct screamed to keep her home, to protect her, but another voice, quieter, more afraid, told me not to disrupt routines yet, not to tip my hand. I'll walk you in, I said. Her fingers wrapped around mine tighter than usual. She stayed that way until we reached her classroom door. She's here, she murmured. I scanned the room. The substitute stood near the windows, sunlight catching on her hair. She wasn't interacting with the kids. She was watching them, watching my child. The woman's eyes flicked to me, then back to my daughter. My daughter's grip tightened. She talks to me, my daughter whispered, when no one else is there. My heart dropped. What does she say? That I'm brave, that I'm like my mom. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. That afternoon, my daughter refused to get out of the car when I came to pick her up. She curled into herself, arms crossed over her chest like armor. She asked me questions today, she said. What kind of questions? About home, about Daddy. The words hit me like ice water. What did you tell her? That Daddy loves me, she said quickly, that you do too. Did she ask you to keep secrets? My daughter hesitated, just for a second. She said some things are heavy, she murmured, and that kids shouldn't carry them alone. I pulled her into my arms right there in the parking lot, not caring who saw. That night, the nightmares returned. This time, she didn't scream, she whimpered, soft and broken like she was trying not to wake anyone. When she finally calmed, she looked up at me with eyes too old for her face. "Mom," she said, "she knows Daddy's secret." My heart stopped. "What secret?" I asked, my voice barely there. She shook her head. "I don't know, but Daddy looks scared again." And in that moment, I knew this was no longer about trust. It was about survival. Once fear takes root, memory stops being linear. It starts circling. While my daughter slept beside me that night, her small hand curled into my sleeve, my mind wandered backward through years I thought I understood. Moments I'd filed away as normal, harmless, love with edges. My husband liked things a certain way. That's how I'd always described it. He liked the doors locked by 10, the lights off in unused rooms, our daughter's schedule planned down to the minute. At first, it felt like stability. After my own chaotic childhood, his order had felt like safety. But order can become control so quietly you don't notice until you can't breathe. I remembered the first time he corrected me in front of someone else. A dinner party. I had told a story slightly wrong, mixed up dates. He smiled, touched my wrist, and said, "No, that's not how it happened." Gentle, polite, final. I'd laughed it off. I remembered how he insisted on driving whenever we went somewhere new. "I know the routes better," he'd say. How he'd discourage spontaneous plans. How he'd frame it all as concern. "Let's not confuse her," he'd say about our daughter. "Let's keep things consistent." Consistency became a word I stopped questioning. When our daughter was born, he insisted on choosing her school, her pediatrician, her extracurriculars. He said he was just being involved, a good father. And I let him. Over the years, I'd watched him manage information like currency, what to share, what to withhold. If something upset me, he'd soften it with logic until I felt silly for reacting. "You're reading into it," he'd say. "You're emotional today. Let's not jump to conclusions." I'd learned to doubt my instincts because trusting him felt easier than trusting myself. Now, watching our daughter flinch at school bells and whisper about secrets, those old moments rearrange themselves into something uglier. He didn't just value privacy, he controlled narratives. I thought about the way he'd reacted when I mentioned the substitute, the way he'd dismissed it without curiosity, the way he'd warned me to drop it without actually saying the words. I thought about the paperwork, signed without me, the decision made alone. And I realized something that made my stomach drop. He hadn't brought that woman into our daughter's life accidentally. He'd done it because he believed he could manage the outcome. I sat at the kitchen table the next morning while he drank his coffee, scrolling through his phone like nothing was wrong. The normalcy felt obscene. "You seem tired," he said casually. "She's not sleeping. Our daughter." He didn't look up. "Kids go through phases." "She's afraid," I said. He paused then, just for a heartbeat. "Of what?" he asked. I met his eyes. "You tell me." The silence that followed was heavy, measured. He recovered quickly, of course, he always did. "You're imagining patterns that aren't there. This stress isn't good for her or for you." There it was. Concern turned inward, blame redirected. I felt something inside me harden. That night, after our daughter was asleep, I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and watched my husband remove his watch, line it up perfectly on the dresser, and switch off the lamp. For the first time, I didn't feel safe beside him. I felt managed. I thought of my daughter whispering, shrinking, carrying weight she shouldn't even know exists, and I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Whatever truth he was burying, it was already poisoning our home. Tomorrow, I would confront him. Not as his wife, but as her mother. I chose the morning carefully. Our daughter was supposed to be at a friend's house after school. The house would be quiet, no witnesses, no distractions. I told myself this was about clarity, not conflict, that if I asked calmly, he'd explain, that truth would surface if I gave it space. That was the lie I told myself. He was at the counter when I started, tie loose, coffee cooling, posture relaxed, a man entirely unaware his world was about to tilt.
I went to the school yesterday, I said, keeping my voice even. He didn't look up. Why? I wanted to understand why a substitute was specially requested for our daughter's class. He smiled then, not warmly, patiently, like you smile at someone who's missed something obvious. You're overthinking, he said. Schools rotate substitutes all the time. I saw the paperwork, I replied. You signed it. That got his attention. He turned slowly, eyebrows lifting just enough to suggest concern. I didn't think it was a big deal, he said. They needed extra support. I helped. You didn't tell me. I didn't think I had to, he said gently. You've been sensitive lately. There it was, the soft pivot, the reframing. She watches our daughter, I said. She speaks to her alone. That's her job. She told our child to keep secrets. He laughed, a small, incredulous sound. Do you hear yourself? My hands clenched at my sides. Who is she? The smile faded, not into anger, but into something colder. Calculation. She's nothing, someone from my past who happened to be available. Your past? I pressed. She's qualified, he snapped, then caught himself, lowered his voice. You're making this into something ugly. What is she doing here? I asked again. He stepped closer. You're projecting your fears onto our daughter, he said. That's not healthy. I stared at him, stunned by how easily the words came, how smoothly he twisted concern into accusation. She's having nightmares, I said. She's wetting the bed. He sighed dramatically. Because you're feeding her anxiety. That's when I heard the floorboard creak. I turned. Our daughter stood in the hallway, her pajama top twisted in her hands, eyes wide. She hadn't gone to her friend's house. She'd heard everything. Go to your room, he said sharply. She flinched. Don't raise your voice at her, I snapped. She shouldn't be listening to adult conversations, he said, eyes never leaving mine. This is exactly what I'm talking about. I knelt in front of her. Sweetheart, it's okay. Go play for a bit. She hesitated, then turned slowly away. As soon as she disappeared, his voice dropped. You're crossing a line, he said. No, you crossed it when you brought a stranger into our child's life and lied about it. His jaw tightened. I didn't lie. You said you were at work. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. You don't owe me a minute-by-minute account of my day. I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because something inside me finally broke. You brought her here to control something, didn't you? His eyes darkened. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me, I said. Tell me the truth. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he might. Instead, he straightened, smoothed his tie, and looked at me like I was a problem to be managed. This obsession ends now, he said quietly. You're upsetting our daughter. You're undermining me. And if you keep pushing, you're going to regret it. My blood ran cold. Is that a threat? I asked. It's a warning, he replied. Drop it. Behind him, down the hallway, I saw our daughter's door slowly close, and I knew she'd heard enough to last a lifetime. I hadn't planned on going back to the school, but some instinct pulled me there the next day. My daughter had been unusually quiet at breakfast, picking at her cereal, and I couldn't shake the image of her shrinking against the classroom walls. Something inside me refused to let this go. I lingered near the hallway outside her classroom, pretending to check the bulletin board. I wasn't listening, not at first, but then I heard it. A voice, calm and low, saying a name I didn't recognize at first. Just make sure Lillian is ready for the reading group. We don't want her to fall behind. I froze. Lillian. That name, my chest tightened. I knew that name. Somewhere deep in my memory, it rattled loose. I ducked behind the corner, pretending to fix my hair as my mind raced. Lillian. Why did that sound familiar? Then it hit me. A photo from years ago, a faded picture tucked into a drawer I hadn't opened in ages. A younger version of my husband, smiling too widely, arms slung around a woman with bright hair and a mischievous grin. A woman he had told me about once, years before we married, briefly, passing mention in a story he dismissed as a mistake of youth. I remembered the conversation vividly.
"I had a fiancée before I met you," he'd said one night, voice careful, almost casual. "She knew too much about me, things I didn't want in the world." And I'd nodded because I trusted him, because it was supposed to be nothing, because I chose to ignore the itch in my gut. But now, standing in the hall, hearing that name, watching her hover over my daughter's classroom, it clicked. The substitute, the woman with the pointed brown shoes, she wasn't random. She wasn't temporary in the sense I thought. My pulse spiked. Lillian, his former fiancée, the one he had supposedly left behind, erased from his life, kept in the past, and yet here she was. I watched her bend down, speak softly to a child, her presence commanding without being loud, every movement deliberate, controlled, knowing. She glanced at the doorway, and her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. Recognition flashed there, subtle, precise. She knew I had seen her. I stumbled backwards, heart hammering. How much did she know? How much had she been planted to observe? And why bring her this close to my child? The memory of his words returned sharply. She knew too much about me, things I didn't want in the world. Now I understood. That wasn't about love or heartbreak. That was about secrets. And she had come back, not by chance, but with purpose. My mind spun, trying to fit the pieces together. His strange behavior over the past weeks, the lies about being at work, the subtle threats when I asked questions, the insistence that our daughter keep quiet. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't coincidence. It was strategy. Lillian, the name repeated itself in my head, heavy with meaning. The woman who had haunted his past now stood in our daughter's classroom, a quiet storm waiting to strike, or to reveal what had been buried for years. I pressed my hands to my knees, trying to steady my racing thoughts. My pulse was deafening in my ears. And then, with absolute clarity, I realized the truth I had feared for weeks. This was no ordinary substitute. This was his former fiancée, the one he had claimed no longer existed in his life, the one he hid, erased, and perhaps feared. The weight of it hit me like a punch. Every instinct, every warning, every sleepless night pointed to the same horrifying conclusion. She was here for him, for us, and I had been blind until now. And worst of all, our daughter had already met her, already spoken to her, already carried pieces of this secret she shouldn't have known. I swallowed hard and pressed myself against the wall, trying to think, trying to breathe, trying to prepare for the confrontation I knew I couldn't avoid. Because now I knew her name, and knowing her name meant knowing the past my husband had fought so hard to bury.
Once you start looking for secrets, you see them everywhere. After the revelation about Lillian, I couldn't stop thinking about her, who she really was, why my husband had allowed her back into our lives under the guise of a substitute teacher. Every detail he'd ever carefully managed suddenly seemed like a breadcrumb trail leading somewhere dark. I started digging, slowly, cautiously. At first, online searches, old social media posts, public records, then school records, incident reports, anything that could confirm my suspicions. I told myself it was about protecting my daughter, but a part of me was also desperate to know what I hadn't been told, what he had spent years burying. It didn't take long for me to find something that made my stomach drop. An old article from nearly a decade ago, buried in an obscure archive. A story about a small legal dispute, a personal accusation, an allegation that had never gone to court. He had been accused of misconduct in his early career. The details were vague, the outcome even vaguer. It seemed to disappear almost as quickly as it was published. And then I saw her name, Lillian. She was listed as the key witness. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. The woman standing in my daughter's classroom, speaking softly to children, guiding them like a gentle shadow. She had been the one holding him accountable. She had seen the truth. I remembered his stories, half-truths he had told me over the years, the casual way he described difficult situations in his past, always painting himself as the victim of circumstance. I'd nodded, believed him. I had trusted him. But Lillian wasn't just someone from his past. She was the person who knew the truth about him, the secret he had hidden from everyone, even me. And the more I looked, the clearer it became. The case had been silenced, not dismissed, not resolved by justice, but silenced. He had used influence, charm, and money to make sure it never saw the light of day, a quiet erasure of the woman who could expose him. My hands shook as I scrolled through emails I had managed to dig up from old accounts, mentions of settlements, veiled warnings, arrangements to relocate Lillian quietly. A picture emerged of someone who had been carefully erased from his life. Someone's knowledge had been too dangerous to let survive unchecked. And yet, here she was, in my daughter's classroom, smiling at children, speaking calmly, controlling every interaction as if she had done it her entire life. It hit me suddenly. He hadn't allowed her to come back by chance. He had brought her into our daughter's life deliberately. Not to teach, not to help, to control, to manipulate, to make sure she didn't tell anyone what she knew. He had spent years building a life of order, control, and secrecy. Every lie he had told, every careful step he had taken, it wasn't just about keeping up appearances. It was about keeping Lillian contained, about neutralizing the one person who could destroy him. My bile rose in my throat. The woman who now spent her days near my daughter, smiling softly and speaking calmly, was part of a strategy, my husband's silent war fought from the shadows. I remembered our daughter's words. She knows Daddy's secret. It all made sense. He had underestimated her, underestimated my child, and underestimated me. Because the truth, as I now saw it, was worse than anything I had imagined. He had brought danger into our home, not recklessly, not by accident, but with full awareness. He had used our daughter as a pawn, trusting that secrecy, fear, and obedience would keep his past buried. And now it was out. I replayed every small oddity of the past weeks, the special requests, the lies about being at work, the veiled threats when I pressed for answers, the way he had watched our daughter, not protectively, but possessively, like she was a piece of property in a game he alone understood. It was all part of the same design. My anger rose, hot and sharp through my chest. Fear and betrayal twisted together, a knot I couldn't untangle. The man I had married, the one I had trusted with my heart and our child's safety, was a man who had spent decades running from consequences, who had silenced witnesses, who had turned our daughter's life into a chessboard, each move calculated, each secret guarded. And Lillian, his former fiancée, the key witness he had once tried to erase, was now at the center of it all, watching, waiting, and judging. For the first time, I realized something terrifyingly clear. He hadn't brought her here for teaching. He hadn't brought her here to help. He had brought her here to control her knowledge, to control the past, to control my daughter. And I knew that confronting him would be nothing like the arguments we had before. This wasn't about dinner plans or homework or being late to soccer practice. This was about the darkness he had buried, the manipulations he had orchestrated, and the life he had tried to protect at any cost, including ours. I closed my laptop, my hands shaking. The room felt impossibly quiet, heavy with realization. He thought he controlled everything, but he hadn't counted on me realizing the truth. Not yet. And now that I had, nothing could be the same again. I didn't sleep that night. Every thought of my daughter curled up in her bed, clutching her pillow, made my chest ache. And every memory of the substitute, Lillian, hovering near her classroom, watching her, questioning her gently, made my stomach turn. By morning, the truth that had been forming in my mind became sharp and undeniable. My daughter had been used as leverage. It wasn't just coincidence that Lillian had been placed in her class. It wasn't just that my husband had signed the forms behind my back or lied about being at work. He had calculated every detail, ensuring our daughter was at the exact place and time where Lillian could observe, assess, and, perhaps most frighteningly, control him. I watched our daughter that morning as she climbed into the car, still quiet, still wary. She barely looked at me. Her small hands fidgeted with the straps of her backpack. I realized that she had absorbed the tension I hadn't even known existed, had internalized it without complaint, without explanation. She was carrying the weight of a secret she didn't fully understand. I had been so focused on uncovering Lillian's identity, on piecing together my husband's lies, that I hadn't paused to think about what this meant for my child. My daughter was in the middle of a psychological chess game, and she didn't even know it. At school, I lingered outside her classroom, trying to see Lillian without being noticed.
She wasn't interacting with the kids much, simply observing, speaking softly to those she needed to guide, giving feedback with a tone that was impossible to misinterpret as casual. Every glance, every word, every gesture seemed calculated, like she knew precisely how to influence not just my daughter, but my husband as well. I realized then the brilliance of it. Lillian had been a threat once, the key witness to my husband's past, a danger to the carefully constructed life he had built. And he had brought her close. Close enough to gauge his reactions, close enough to manipulate outcomes, close enough to remind him what was at stake. And he had done it using our daughter. The magnitude of it hit me like a punch to the gut. He had placed my child in harm's way, not physically, but emotionally, mentally, psychologically. Every interaction she had with Lillian, every subtle observation, every whispered word, my daughter was unknowingly participating in his strategy, serving as the very instrument of pressure meant to keep my husband compliant. I remembered her whispered words. She knows Daddy's secret. She wasn't just afraid for her father's truth being exposed, she was living in the middle of it. She was the vessel, the point of contact, the unknowing messenger between two adults whose world she didn't understand. I clenched the steering wheel as I drove home, imagining scenarios I couldn't bear to articulate. What if something had happened while she was at school? What if Lillian had pushed too far? What if my husband had miscalculated and our daughter had been caught in a way that would leave permanent scars? My pulse raced, my hands shook. The weight of this realization was suffocating. He had gambled with her safety. And for what? To protect his past? To silence a witness? To manage an illusion of control? When I got home, I watched him from the doorway while he read the paper at the kitchen table. He didn't notice me. He never did. He never noticed what he thought was inconsequential. But now I could see every motion, every tiny gesture as part of the pattern I had finally learned to recognize. He was used to playing pieces on a board. He was not used to me seeing the board. I felt anger boil beneath my skin, rage so pure it shook me. This wasn't just betrayal, it wasn't just lies, it was endangering my child for selfish reasons. And I realized something else. He had underestimated both of us. He hadn't counted on me piecing it together. He hadn't counted on my instinct to protect our daughter, overriding fear or loyalty or love. And he hadn't counted on the possibility that I would act. I knelt in the hallway outside my daughter's room that night, listening to her soft breathing, imagining the heavy burden she carried. She had no idea what she had been used for, no idea she was the pawn in a game of secrets and fear. And I swore to myself that she never would again. The realization cut deeper than any confrontation could. My husband had risked everything, our child's safety, her peace, her innocence, for the sake of protecting a life built on lies. And that was the line. I couldn't pretend ignorance anymore. I couldn't trust the man who had constructed a world where my child's well-being was expendable. He had put her in the middle, and I was done letting him dictate the rules. I waited until our daughter was asleep. Her breathing was steady, untroubled, unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. I stood in the kitchen, clutching my laptop, the screen still glowing with the evidence I had gathered. Emails, digital signatures, archived articles, photographs, everything pointing to the truth I had long suspected but hadn't dared to name aloud. When he walked in from work, briefcase in hand, I didn't greet him. I just set the laptop on the counter, screen facing him, and let the silence grow heavy. He looked up, confused. "What's this?" "You know exactly what it is," I said quietly, "and I know exactly what you've been doing." He raised an eyebrow, a small smirk forming at the corner of his lips. "Overreacting again, I see." I felt a flicker of anger ignite. Don't you dare try to gaslight me now." He leaned back against the counter, hands in his pockets. Calm, too calm. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" I slammed the laptop open, thrusting the screen toward him. Look at this. Lillian's placement, the paperwork, the lies about your whereabouts, everything. Why did you bring her into our daughter's life? Why did you use her as leverage against me?" His eyes narrowed, and for the first time a shadow of something darker flickered across his face. Leverage, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. You're dramatizing. I'm not dramatizing, I shouted, voice shaking. She's been in our daughter's classroom, speaking to her privately, observing her, asking questions. You did this deliberately. You lied about work. You signed forms behind my back. You've been manipulating both of us. He laughed then, low, humorless, sharp. Manipulating? Is that what you call it? Yes, I said, tears pricking my eyes. You've endangered her emotional safety. You've used her as a pawn. Do you have any idea what that means for her? He shook his head, smirk fading, replaced by a shrug of indifference. She's fine. She's our daughter. She'll adjust. And Lillian, she's doing what she has to do, just like I did. You don't care, I whispered, stunned. You don't care that she's terrified, that she's shrinking before my eyes? He leaned in, voice low and steady, almost casual. Of course I care, but this is bigger than her feelings. You've always thought too small, too emotionally. I did what was necessary to protect my life, our life. If you can't see that, that's your problem, not mine. I couldn't believe it. The man I had married, the man I had trusted, showing no remorse for our child, justifying his actions as strategic necessity. He had rationalized risking her well-being for control, for secrecy, for his own comfort. I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. Everything I had loved, everything I had believed about our marriage collapsed into this stark truth. He had never been my partner in life. He had been a strategist in a game where people were expendable, and I had been too blind to see it. You lied to me. You lied to our daughter. You put her in the middle of your manipulations, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, shaking but resolute. And you think that's acceptable? He leaned back as though he had already won the argument. It was acceptable. It was necessary. And now you know the truth. So what are you going to do about it? The air between us was taut, charged with everything unsaid, everything betrayed. I wanted to scream, to hit, to demand an apology I knew I would never get. Instead, I felt something settle inside me, calm, firm, certain. I realized then that this was not a fight I could win, not with words, not with reason, not with evidence, because he had no conscience to appeal to, no morality that overlapped with mine. I stood silently, letting his words hang in the kitchen like smoke. He studied me, expecting a reaction. I gave him none. Don't you dare walk away, he warned. You can't just... I am leaving, I said, quietly, just a whisper, but every word carried weight. I will protect our daughter, I will protect myself, and I will no longer play by your rules. His face didn't change, his voice didn't falter. You think walking away fixes anything? It fixes everything that matters. I closed the laptop, not with force, not with drama, just closed it, a quiet declaration that this chapter of our lives, this marriage, was over. I didn't raise my voice again. I didn't beg. I didn't plead. I only moved toward the door, toward freedom, toward safety for my child. And as I opened that door, I felt a weight lift, a mix of fear, sorrow, and the first spark of relief. I was leaving. He watched me go. He said nothing. And for the first time, I felt the power that comes not from control, but from knowing the truth and refusing to be trapped by it. The next morning, I knew I had to confront Lillian, alone, away from my daughter, away from my husband, away from the lies that had surrounded me for so long. I waited until the school office was quiet. I asked to speak with her under the pretense of a parent-teacher check-in. They didn't question it. Temporary substitutes were rarely treated with scrutiny, and by the time she arrived, I was ready, my chest tight with anger, fear, and a need for answers. She walked toward me with that same calm, deliberate stride that had first unsettled me weeks ago. Her hair was perfectly in place, her shoes clicking softly on the tile, and her expression was neutral, almost guarded. "Mrs. Harris?" she said, tilting her head slightly. "I didn't expect to see you." "Call me whatever you want," I said, voice low. "I need the truth." Her eyes flickered, a moment of hesitation I hadn't seen before. Then she nodded. "I suppose we should talk." We moved to an empty classroom. She closed the door behind us. The familiar scent of dry erase markers and classroom rugs did nothing to soften the tension in the room. "Why are you here?"
I asked, not mincing words. Why our daughter? Lillian exhaled slowly. I didn't expect a child to be involved. Her voice was calm, almost eerily so, but her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the strap of her bag. I thought I was just going to teach. That's it, that's all. I never planned on this. She gestured vaguely at the school, at the classroom, at the fact that my child had been unknowingly caught in a long-standing battle she barely understood. What do you mean? I pressed. She looked down for a moment, collecting herself. Then she met my eyes again. He brought me back because I knew things he wanted contained. He thought proximity would give him control. He never intended for it to affect your daughter. That part was unintentional. My jaw tightened. Unintentional? She's been terrified. She's been shrinking before my eyes. She's been used, manipulated as a pawn in his game. Lillian flinched at my words, and for a brief moment I saw something in her expression that reminded me she had been a victim too, just not in the same way. Regret collided with rage in her eyes. I never wanted her involved. I warned him about the risks. I told him repeatedly, she's a child, you can't. Her voice faltered, then hardened. But he doesn't listen. He never does. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me long enough to ask the one thing that had haunted me since I uncovered her identity. Do you have proof? Proof of what you know? Proof of what he did? Her lips pressed into a thin line. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder. I felt my pulse quicken as she handed it to me. Inside were documents I hadn't expected to see. Signed agreements, archived emails, legal documents, all evidence of his past manipulations, settlements, and the orchestrated silencing of Lillian. Proof that he had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide a dark truth from everyone, including me. This is everything, she said softly. Everything I have. I didn't want to bring it into your life, but you deserve to see it. You deserve to know what he's capable of. I stared at the pages, heart hammering, as the pieces finally aligned. The lies, the manipulation, the calculated control. It was all here, all undeniable. You didn't mean to hurt her, I said finally, voice trembling. But she's been caught in the middle of all this. I know, Lillian said, a tight knot of emotion threading her voice, and I hate myself for it, but it was never supposed to be like this. He's ruthless when it comes to hiding his past. I couldn't refuse, and I didn't realize how close he'd put your daughter to it until it was too late. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. For the first time, I saw vulnerability in her calm exterior, a person trapped in a web of deceit not entirely of her own making. I closed the folder slowly, the weight of the evidence pressing in on me, but also giving me clarity. I could finally see the whole picture, the past he had hidden, the manipulation, the danger, the deliberate use of my daughter as leverage. Lillian's voice broke my thoughts. You need to protect her now, and protect yourself. I can't fix what's been done, but you can stop him from doing more. I nodded silently. I didn't need to. The folder in my hands, the truth laid bare, was enough. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of power, a sense that despite the devastation, I now held the knowledge and evidence to protect my child. And Lillian, the woman my husband tried to erase from existence, finally gave me the one thing I needed, the undeniable proof, the truth, and with it, a way forward. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. My daughter's safety, her peace of mind, and her childhood were no longer negotiable. Fear had no place here. Not fear of my husband, not fear of his influence, not fear of the carefully constructed life he thought would keep us trapped. The first call I made was to the school principal. I asked for a private meeting, explained that I had serious concerns about a staff member and the involvement of my daughter in decisions made without my consent. I left nothing out, but I didn't overstate either. I simply laid the facts as they were. Paperwork signed by someone other than me, manipulations that had caused my child distress, and the presence of an adult with a vested interest in my husband's hidden past. The principal listened, eyebrows knitting together. "We take these matters very seriously," she said. "We'll review all documentation and place her under careful supervision immediately." Even through the tension, a tiny spark of relief ignited. My daughter's school was no longer a space where danger could hide behind polite smiles and routine. Next, I contacted the local authorities. I didn't dramatize, I didn't embellish, I stated the facts. A child had been unknowingly placed in a manipulative environment. There was evidence of calculated deceit involving an adult with past influence over my husband, and my daughter had been distressed. I handed over all of the evidence Lillian had given me: emails, forms, archived documents, and proof of misrepresentation. The officer on the line took notes carefully. "You've done the right thing," he said. "We'll make sure your concerns are investigated thoroughly. Safety of the child comes first." For the first time in weeks, I felt a measure of control returning. Not the false control my husband had tried to wield, but real protective action. I didn't wait. I also consulted a lawyer. The words I had been afraid to speak, the ones that involved custody, legal rights, and protection, were now spoken firmly, with clarity. I wasn't acting out of vengeance, I was acting out of duty. Duty to my child, duty to myself. That evening, when my husband came home, I didn't hide the calm authority that had replaced the fear. He noticed immediately, of course. His gaze sharpened, lips pressed into a thin line. "You've done what?" he asked, voice low, controlled. "Taken steps to protect our daughter," I said simply. "No discussion, no negotiation. This is her safety." For the first time, his usual poise faltered. He tried to mask it with annoyance, with the casual authority he had wielded for years, but I saw the cracks. He could no longer manipulate the narrative, could no longer bend the situation to suit his secrecy. Over the next few days, the school implemented strict measures. Lillian's access was monitored. Interactions with my daughter were limited and observed. The authorities began reviewing the documents I had provided, making inquiries that I knew would unravel the carefully guarded secrecy my husband had relied upon for so long. And through it all, I watched my daughter slowly emerge from the shadow of fear she had been carrying. The first real sign came at breakfast a week later. She poured her cereal, humming softly under her breath, a small, off-key tune, but unmistakably hers. "Mom," she said suddenly, looking up at me, "I feel happy today." I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. "Happy?" I asked, heart pounding. She nodded. "I don't feel scared, not like before." And then she smiled, that bright, unguarded, innocent smile I had thought had vanished forever, the one that had been replaced with hesitancy, quiet anxiety, and worry. I felt my own eyes sting, but this time with relief rather than tears of fear. My daughter was back, not entirely healed, but breathing again, existing again, laughing again. I realized then that all the fear, all the sleepless nights, all the confrontation and investigation, it had led here, to her smile, to the knowledge that I had chosen her over fear, over loyalty to a man who didn't deserve it, over the life he had tried to manipulate. In choosing my daughter, I had reclaimed something vital, my courage, my voice, my freedom. And in that moment, watching her twirl her cereal in the cereal bowl, humming her little tune, I knew that whatever came next, whatever challenges, whatever confrontations, I would never waver again. Her safety, her peace, her happiness were no longer negotiable. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the warmth of hope bloom in my chest. She smiled again, and I promised myself I would never let anyone steal that from her, ever again. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly. A few days after I had taken legal and protective measures, whispers began to circulate. At first, in hushed tones among school staff, documents reviewed, questions asked, protocols suddenly scrutinized. Then, emails from parents, vague at first, then pointed, reached the principal's office. Why was this allowed? Who approved this placement? Our children's safety matters. The ripple grew, and before long, the carefully constructed walls my husband had built around his secrets began to crumble.
He was exposed, not with drama, but with undeniable proof. The evidence I had gathered, combined with Lillian's testimony and the school's own investigation, left no room for denial. Settlements he had quietly orchestrated, attempts to silence Lillian, and the deliberate placement of my daughter as leverage all came to light. I watched from the sidelines, tense, waiting. The first sign of his professional undoing came in the form of a notice from his company, an internal investigation, immediate suspension, meetings with legal counsel, rumors spreading among colleagues. Reputation, painstakingly built over decades, began to unravel. He had always relied on control of information, control of perception, but control has a weakness. It only lasts until someone else holds the truth. At the school, the scandal unfolded in quiet but sharp waves. Staff meetings, parent inquiries, board interventions. Lillian's name was involved, yes, but carefully, her role framed as one of truth-telling and protection. She became an ally, not an adversary, and the parents, once oblivious to the tension underlying the walls of the classroom, now demanded accountability. I attended some of the meetings. I didn't speak much, but my presence mattered. People watched the woman who had acted decisively to protect her child. I felt a mix of pride, exhaustion, and lingering fear. The fear wasn't gone. It never fully leaves, but it was tempered by relief, by action, by the knowledge that my daughter was safe. Social media began to murmur just as quietly, local groups speculating, neighbors noticing changes, small communities piecing together what had happened. By the time the local newspaper published a careful report, the story was out in the open. A trusted man, hiding a dark past, had allowed it to intersect with a child's life in ways that had endangered emotional safety. Names were redacted, but the weight of exposure was enough. I walked through the park one afternoon, my daughter skipping beside me, and felt the subtle shift in the air. People nodded politely, some whispered behind hands, others avoided our path entirely. It was a strange relief to see him unmasked, not in vengeance, but in truth. And yet, amidst the relief, there was something bittersweet. Part of me mourned what had been lost. Not my daughter, she was returning to herself, but the life I had imagined with him, the marriage that had been built on lies, carefully hidden and manipulated trust. I mourned the possibility that some scars would linger, that my child's innocence had been touched by deception, that I had been blind too long. Then, late one evening, as my daughter played with her stuffed animals, my phone buzzed. It was a message from him. "Can we talk? I want to see her." I stared at the screen, heart hammering, anger, disbelief, fear, and a strange lingering sadness all collided in one chaotic wave. I didn't reply. I didn't want him near her, not now, not ever without oversight. My daughter peeked at the phone, curiosity shining in her eyes. "Who is it?" she asked. "No one," I said gently, slipping it into my pocket. "Just someone from the past." She nodded and returned to her game. In that moment, I realized that the world had shifted. The truth had come to light, and with it, the power balance had changed. He could try to contact us, try to manipulate, try to charm, but the consequences of his actions were now visible to everyone, and I had the authority, the evidence, and the courage to protect my daughter. For the first time, I felt a quiet certainty. No one could touch her now, not him, not his secrets, not his lies. And she smiled again, unaware of the storm that had raged, but safe in the calm I had fought to create. That night, after the sun had set and the house was quiet, I sat on my daughter's bed, pulling her close. Her hair smelled faintly of shampoo, her little hands clutching the edges of her blanket like she was still holding on to the fear she had carried for weeks. "Mom," she whispered, the same soft, tentative voice she had used when she first told me about Lillian. Are we safe now?" I swallowed, holding back the tears threatening to spill. "Yes, sweetheart, we are safe. You're safe." Her small eyes searched mine, looking for the honesty she deserved. "But, Daddy?" I took a deep breath. Every instinct in me screamed to protect her innocence, to simplify, to shield, but I knew better. Truth, carefully delivered, was more powerful than avoidance. "Daddy made some very big mistakes," I said softly. "He hurt people in ways he shouldn't have. But you were never at fault. You weren't the problem. You were just caught in the middle." She nodded slowly, absorbing the words, her tiny hands tightening on mine. Was he trying to scare me? I shook my head, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. No, honey, not you. He was trying to control things that weren't his to control. That's why I had to step in. That's why I took action to protect you, because you deserve to feel safe, loved, and free to be yourself. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then back at me. Will it happen again? I smiled, though my throat felt tight. No, because now we know the truth, and now we make the rules for our home, for our life, for our safety. You and I, we decide what's right, and no one else gets to change that. Her small face lit up with a tentative smile, the first unguarded expression I had seen in weeks. It was fragile, but it was real. And in that moment, I felt something shift. The fear that had clung to both of us began to loosen, replaced with trust, understanding, and a sense of protection she could finally feel. I took her little hands in mine. You know what's most important, sweetie? That you always tell the truth, even when it's scary. That you speak up if something feels wrong, and that you know, no matter what, you can always come to me. Always. She nodded again, her head resting against my chest. I will, Mom. I promise. I stroked her hair, feeling the weight of the past weeks begin to lift. The lies, the manipulation, the hidden truths, all of it had been terrifying, but now it had a purpose. It had brought us closer, made us stronger, and reminded me that love, when paired with honesty and courage, could overcome even the darkest shadows. She yawned, curling into me, safe and unafraid. I kissed her forehead gently. Sleep well, my brave girl, I whispered. And as I tucked her in, listening to her soft breathing, I felt the irony of the moment settle in. She once whispered secrets to me with fear and uncertainty. Now it was I who held the power of truth, protection, and safety in my hands. She whispered again, half asleep, small and trusting, Mom, I love you. I smiled, softly with a quiet strength. I love you too, sweetheart. Always. And for the first time since that fateful confession at school, the power of that whispered moment had fully shifted.